there are lessons around public land. I think it took us a long time to get on site, and maybe there's more that could be done about different public organisations working together to make the better use of their land. There has been previous confusion about housing, so I think the government is great that they've set that level of ambition, but sadly that level of housing delivery hasn't been seen for a very long time, and I think to sort of ramp up to those sorts of levels of house building will require a series of changes. The thing with this crisis or emergency is that it's been 40 years in the making, and actually what the government and the private sector working together are going to have to do is concentrate on about a dozen different things, and they're probably going to have to do that for a few years in order to ramp it up. But I'm positive, and I think if the will is there, we'll give it a good go.
Hello, I'm Toby Fox from 1.5 Million New Homes, the Local Government Challenge, sponsored by Redloft and Mount Anvil. Each month, we're visiting a different council to find out what works and what needs to change to get more homes built, with the aim of getting to that 1.5 million homes target. And this month, we've come to the London Borough of Brent. Hello, who are you and where are we?
Yeah, hi Toby, it's Jonathan Kay here, Head of Regeneration at Brent Council, and we're on a sunny Wembley High Road, looking at the new buildings that are coming up around us here.
And what are these new buildings? What's going up here?
Well, the ones that we're looking at here on the right is Cecil Avenue, and on the left we've got Ujima House, or the former site of Ujima House, which is going to be called Zephaniah House.
After the poet?
After the poet, who used to be a patron of Ujima Housing Association, who had a former office block on this site. So right. It's a Regeneration town centre schemes, 291 homes, new commercial space, new community space, publicly accessible courtyard, 50% affordable housing, and we're delivering that in partnership with Wates.
Fantastic. And we've been in Wembley Park doing interviews about the scheme there, and that's a very different kind of regeneration, isn't it? It's a single landowner, it's a single developer. It was largely unused before, or derelict use. High street regeneration, very different. Do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah, very true, Toby. I mean, if you look up and down the high road, you can see that there's multiple sites, different ownerships, different shapes, different sizes. You can see build to rent coming up in the high road. You can see registered provider schemes, and now the council leading the way with its own schemes. But it's a tighter urban environment, and there are more constraints. But the opportunities for the town centre are really important. It's not just housing, it's also that footfall that drives the benefit for the local economy and jobs in that commercial space, that new retail and that new office space.
So what do you consider to be successful about the way that you've gone about this scheme?
Well, coming out of the ground in these days is not so straightforward.
The benchmark is low, isn't it? Yeah.
I think it's difficult times. It's a difficult challenge.
Yeah.
I think, if we look at these sites, a lot of work was put in terms of site assembly at the start, backed by the Mayor of London as part of the housing zones. A lot of work with, for Education Department to de-designate from educational use, working with Network Rail, and also having to redesign the schemes in light of the Building Safety Act and put secondary staircores in there. So it's very challenging to get things underway and make things stack up these days, Toby.
And are there lessons that you can draw from this scheme for schemes elsewhere, perhaps for councils elsewhere, in terms of how you faced up to those challenges and changing conditions?
I think something that's unique about this scheme is the use of public land, the use of public money, different funding streams. It's a blended scheme. It's a bit unusual for a council-led scheme, in Brent at least anyway, where typically you're seeing sort of 100% affordable programme, which is really important and really critical. But with that mixed tenure approach, that I think helps with the finances, and in a town centre environment, it is a bit different. I think there are lessons around public land. I think it took us a long time to get on site, and maybe there's more that could be done about different public organisations working together to make the better use of their land. I just think if you look at public land, you can look at programmes like the One Public Estate, for example, where you've seen better coordination between different public agencies, and one might think that things might be able to be done more quickly if they were better coordinated.
What sort of time saving do you think is possible in terms of the overall life of this scheme?
Well, it depends on. It took us years to start this scheme on site, and I think there is potentially a role government could play in seeking to ensure that public land comes forward for development more quickly.
What are the other kind of ingredients of success that have gone into this scheme?
Well, it isn't built yet, Toby, so I walk past it every day and it does make me worry a little bit. It's very big, but I think, from our perspective, from the council perspective, the vision for these sites has always been to deliver high quality housing, and so design has been very important. As part of that, the council led on the design and planning and has had a design guardian, John Stiles, who you may have met earlier today. So we really want to ensure high quality homes. So maintaining that standard, I think, is something that, as I said, we're not quite there yet. And I think with Wates, we've got a good partner who's bought into that vision. I think the mixed use nature of the scheme in the location is very important. I think having a mix of uses and available space for the public is critical to make this one a success.
Why is it that you've been able to make this scheme work in such difficult circumstances when so many other schemes are unviable and stalled?
Well, there's a mixture of reasons for that. As I think I've touched on, it's clearly there's an involvement of public land here, public money, also the private finance. It's a blended approach with Wates, bringing in that private homes. I think with timing, we managed to get it away in time. I think there are other schemes that have, I'm sorry to say, fallen foul of potentially delays associated with new building regulations, which whilst entirely necessary, I think it's taking a bit of time for people to find their feet and that change of culture and that change of regime.
So Jonathan, can we build 1.5 million new homes, and can we do it in this Parliament?
I think that's very difficult. Some people would say it's impossible. I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but I think it's very difficult, and I think that a lot of other things would need to be done to sort of make that happen. So I think one thing that's really positive is that the new government has made a really sort of clear statement and has given a clear direction and ambition, and I think there has been previous confusion about housing. So I think the government is great that they've set that level of ambition, but sadly, that level of housing delivery hasn't been seen for a very long time. And I think to sort of ramp up to those sorts of levels of house building will require a series of changes. I think it's positive that the government is looking to simplify planning and to be more positive. I think new towns and Greenbelt review that's currently ongoing. Everybody's looking at that, but then where's the infrastructure for these new developments? I think more generally we need to get all the players on the pitch. I think if you look at the local authority house building, registered provider house building, it's nowhere near the levels of what it was historically, and I'm sorry to say that it will take funding and investment to make that happen. And so I think that is very difficult for the government to find that level of investment. I think also you need to look at the construction industry as a whole. It has shrunk over recent years, and if you're expecting to build that many homes, then there's going to need to be more architects, more planners, more builders, and that takes time to grow that.
Are there digital solutions to some of this capacity problem?
I would hope so. I would like to think so. I think there are ways of simplifying things, and there's potentially opportunities to make things more efficient in terms of prop tech, looking at BIM. I think moving forward, you're also looking at the opportunity for sort of factory build, 3D printing. So I think modern methods of construction is also part of the solution. And I think the thing with this crisis or emergency is that it's been 40 years in the making, and actually what the government and the private sector working together are going to have to do is concentrate on about a dozen different things, and they're probably going to have to do that for a few years in order to ramp it up. But I'm positive, and I think if the will is there, we'll give it a good go.
So that's what everyone else can do, and not to be too blunt about it, but what can councils do to get more homes built?
Well, I think councils, an obvious thing is looking at their assets. I think there is also the planning system to plan for growth. Brent in particular has been very good at making sure that it's got an up-to-date local plan, identifying areas that are most suitable for growth in terms of looking at existing infrastructure, and then going further and producing master plans and visions for development to help provide the confidence to the market to invest in those areas. And then obviously going out and promoting that. Brent is a pro-growth borough. It's got a good track record of housing, and I think that people could learn a few things about those aspects.
And you talked about grant funding, and that is the kind of first answer that everybody gives, particularly for developing more social homes and affordable homes. What level of grant funding do you think is appropriate? What's needed?
Well, the old rule of thumb was, you probably needed about at least half the bill cost, between half and 2/3 of the bill cost, and you can borrow the rest against a rental stream to have truly affordable housing. And unfortunately, bill costs have risen very significantly, and certainly in an urban environment, that would lead to very high grant rates.
And what about in this environment? Because we've just looked at a scheme that you've successfully got coming out of the ground. What grant would be required to support you doing that again and again and again?
£4,000 a square metres or something on bill costs, and as I said, you might need 50 to 2/3 if you want to deliver a social rented home.
And just for people who aren't in the business, how much would that translate into for a scheme of the same scale that we've just seen?
Numbers questions, Toby. Yeah. These are tricky. If you're looking at 4,000 a square metre, you might be at I don't know, total scheme costs, 350 to 400 per unit, possibly.
1,000.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And about half of that would need to be grant funded. So you took 150,000.
These are very broad brush figures.
Absolutely. Yeah. But just to give us an idea,
it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. I think there are it's not grant. There are potentially ways of looking at other funding streams. I think we've talked about the fact that there is the potential to cross-subsidise. So private housing, that potentially provides the opportunity to cross-subsidise and reduces the burden of subsidy requirement. But you can't get away from the fact that affordable housing costs more to build than it is worth. So you need to plug that gap somehow, whether that's through cross-subsidy, whether that's through funding. You could potentially look at ways to reduce build costs. We've talked a little bit about new towns, and we've talked a little bit about green belt, and if you're building on greenfield sites, you would expect us to have a lower build rate. But then, as I said, you've got the infrastructure challenge about how to fund that. Public-private partnerships may have something to say there, and there may be investment that could be tapped into that hasn't been explored to date.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Where do you see that investment coming from? What is that potential?
Well, in terms of infrastructure, certainly it is not uncommon to see private investment into infrastructure, whether that be through pension funds or private investment. This is a common approach that's seen internationally. So greenfield sites, privately funded infrastructure. Additionally, there may be instruments such as tax incremental financing, which we've seen in for example, the 9 Elms Battersea
for the tube
redevelopment for the tube extension.
Yep.
So, looking at different ways of financing is important. It's very easy to say, yes, we need a big chunky grant rate, and I think there will need to be some of that, but I think we also need to work hard at looking at different models of financing.
And what about the resourcing within the council itself? Like how many people do you need in order to deliver what you'd like to deliver?
Well, I think, council, I think in London at least, over the last, 5 years or so, there has been an increase with the Mayor of London programme. We have been building more in London, the London boroughs. In certain respects, picking up where register providers left off. They're having to focus a lot on their stock bases. But to ramp up to the sort of figures that we're potentially talking about, if we're needing local authority and registered providers to scale up, it does need to increase.
And you've been achieving your targets for several years now. You've been overachieving in terms of housing targets. Can you continue to do that even without those changes?
I think, as I said, I think it's challenging. The climate at the moment is I think difficult for a number of reasons. I think we've seen an increase in build costs. I think there's the change from the Building Safety Act that will take, I think, a number of years to settle down. And as I said, I think there's also issues around there having been a contraction in the industry. So it's going to take a bit of time, I think, to turn all of this around. As I said, I think it's really positive that the government has set the ambition, but now we need to follow through in a number of different ways.
Jonathan, thank you very much for your contribution to 1.5 million new homes, the local government challenge.
Thank you, Toby.
And that just about wraps it up for another episode of 1.5 million new homes, the local government challenge, sponsored by Redloft and Mount Anvil. And we're going to be back in a few days with more from Brent. But until then, if you could hit like and subscribe, we'd be really grateful. And thanks very much for watching. See you next time.